Alright guys, we're going to watch a relatively short video here and then I'll chime in at the end.
Pedro Rodrigues Filho is considered the biggest serial killer in all of Brazil. However, he was unlike any other psychopath you had ever heard of. Instead of killing innocents, he killed criminals and murderers. However, his bloody adventures as an anti-hero led him to a violent death. This is the story of Brazilian criminals' worst nightmare. Pedro Rodrigues Filho was born on October the 29th, 1954. Because he came from a very poor family, he could never study. For this reason, he began to dedicate himself to crime at the age of 10. According to rumors, Pedro killed his first victims when he was 11. Due to his psychopathic nature, he did not feel the slightest empathy when killing another human being in cold blood. However, other versions claim that he took his first life at the age of 14 after murdering the deputy mayor of the municipality of Alfenas for kicking out his father after accusing him of stealing food. Soon after, Pedro murdered the real food thief and escaped to Mogi das Cruzes in Sao Paulo. Then he killed a drug dealer and began stealing in the local slums. Nevertheless, his most brutal crime took place within his family. One day, Pedro learned that his father had killed his mother with 21 stab wounds with a machete. Soon, intrusive thoughts and anger invaded his mind, destroying his last glimmers of sanity. Driven by revenge, he visited his father in prison to murder him with a machete, the same type of weapon he had used to kill his mother. Yet, even the number of wounds he inflicted on his father was meticulously planned. Since he was a very vindictive person by nature, he returned the 21 stab wounds he had inflicted on his mother and inflicted an additional one. He then made an incision in his chest and ripped out his heart, biting it and throwing it over his body. This brutality was extremely characteristic of the murderer. It is for this reason that the criminals were so afraid of him. Due to this tragic event, Pedro believed he could improve society by killing other criminals. So he began to do his part, killing every narco or assassin he encountered. In several interviews, Pedro had assured that he killed for pleasure and revenge on those with the criminal path to do good for society. That is why some people called him the perfect psychopath. If Pedro could direct all his anger and violence at the most problematic sector of the population, he could use his illness to keep the streets safe. After continuing to purge the streets of Brazil, he met the love of his life, Maria Aparecida Olympia, the widow of his victims. But unfortunately, the woman suffered a tragic fate at the hand of one of the killer's rivals. Even if Rodrigues hated drug traffickers, he saw nothing wrong with making a living at their expense. That's why he often robbed and plundered their territories. One day, he decided to take over the business of the man he had killed and whose widow he had fallen in love with. Unfortunately, the constant killings carried out by Filho caused him to make powerful enemies. Despite this, Pedro could keep them at bay with his madness and brutality. For this reason, the drug traffickers had to find a way to deal with Pedro's serious blow. If they couldn't end his life, they would attack the person he cared most about, his girlfriend. That is why his enemies kidnapped Maria Aparecida Olympia, had savagely tortured and mutilated her to death. But unfortunately for them, these narcos were unaware what kind of beast they had just awakened. The death of his girlfriend gave Pedro a new mission: to exact revenge. When he set out to kill someone, he would not rest until he did. For this reason, he set out to track down all the people involved in Maria's murder and interrogated them individually. Each time he caught one of those involved, he tortured him, obtained information, and executed them to get to the next person on his list. This modus operandi allowed him to get to the criminal who had murdered Maria. After that, he waited patiently to attack him at the most inopportune moment. Then one day, Pedro burst into a wedding party with 4 friends and killed the person responsible for Maria's murder, and 6 of those were present. As a result, 16 people were also injured in the altercation. The following years, Filho's life was much more brutal and bloodthirsty. Soon, every criminal in Brazil was afraid of becoming the next victim of Pedrino Matador. However, since he was young and inexperienced, justice eventually managed to track him down. In 1973, he was sentenced to 120 years in prison. Despite this, his long stay in prison did not prevent him from pursuing his twisted sense of justice. In fact, he committed his next crime while he was being transferred. Rodrigues was in the back of a police vehicle with two criminals in handcuffs. But when the officers opened the vehicle door, they found that one of them had been killed. This horrific scene would be etched in the officers' minds forever. After the murder, the officers transferred Pedro to prison without knowing the mistake they had just made. Since Pedro was surrounded by criminals, he began killing them individually, eventually.
Couple of additional details they left out, probably because it's short. When he went to the wedding to murder mainly the guy responsible for the death of his wife, he had two former associates of his that came with him. And he made it clear, you do not harm women and children. And they murdered mostly men, and I think quite a few of them were wounded. And the only woman that was hit wasn't killed, but it was the mother of the main guy, because she was trying to shield him from being killed. That's important, in my opinion. Additionally, the guy that he killed in the transport to prison was a serial rapist. Oh, and he was given options when he got to prison. He could either go in general population, which would be with some of the most ruthless criminals in Brazil, many of which already wanted him dead because he had already fucking made a name for himself and created a whole lot of enemies. Or it could essentially be put in like a protection type deal. And because he's a fucking insane man, he didn't give a fuck and chose to go into Gen Pop.
Disposing of 47 inmates. Most of the 71 victims attributed to him were in prison. However, Pedro claimed to have killed more than 100 people, but the authorities could never find all the bodies. He entered prison at 19 and remained until he was 53, dedicated to killing as many inmates as possible. Among these murders, he killed a friend because he had murdered his sister. As a result, he earned the hatred of the entire prison population. For this reason, many inmates agreed to take Rodrigues' life, but unfortunately, they did not count on the ferocity of the serial killer. Pedro killed 3 of his attackers during the ambush and wounded 2 others. After that, few dared to attack him again. During another interview, Pedro confessed that he took pleasure in killing other criminals and had to work hard to keep his impulses in check. This violent behavior earned him a 400-year sentence. Despite this, Rodrigues Filho was released in 2007 after 34 years in prison. Since the new penal codes in Brazil do not allow a person to serve more than 30 consecutive years in prison, his 400-year sentence was annulled. After regaining his freedom, Filho began working as a security guard. However, on September the 15th, 2011, the authorities arrested him again for illegal possession of weapons, his participation in 6 riots, and threatening to kill the then serial killer, the Park Maniatic. It is believed that they could track him down because one of the agents of the Civil Police Division of Criminological Investigations received anonymous information that Pedrino Matador was hiding somewhere in the city of Camborio. And it is possible that this information was provided by one of his many enemies. However, his second stay in prison did not last long, as he was released again in 2008. Thanks to his growing popularity and the advice of a friend, he created a YouTube channel where he shared videos explaining his criminal background and advising young people and the general public not to commit acts against human life. Unfortunately, his YouTube career came to a crashing end. On March the 5th, 2023, after spending decades terrorizing other Brazilian criminals, Rodrigues finally died at their hands. The 68-year-old was in front of his home in Mogi das Cruzes when he was accosted by several hooded attackers who got out of a car to shoot him dead. The serial killer's body was found with multiple wounds, so his assailants spared no bullets. Unfortunately, the authorities could not identify the hitman, but they suspected it could be a revenge killing. Since Pedro had too many enemies, it is possible that several criminal groups were plotting to take revenge. That is how Brazil's biggest serial killer lost his life. His assassinations won him thousands of supporters who believed he was a necessary evil to curb crime. As a result, his peculiar life inspired the series Dexter, which shows a psychopath using his murderous talents to eliminate the worst criminals. Today, the story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho is well known throughout Brazil. While some people defend the crimes he committed, others think he was worse than the criminals he hunted. Yet, no matter what people believe, he will always remain in the memory of the Brazilian people as one of the most prominent serial killers to ever walk the earth.
So, my opinions will be very unpopular to many, but I don't care. So, Pedro himself kind of reformed as he got older and kind of spread the message on YouTube. I haven't seen any of these videos, but that what he did was wrong and you shouldn't take a life no matter what, that sort of thing, especially like counseling against gangs and shit like that. But I completely disagree. Any video that I've seen, and I've seen a few now, involving Pedro has been mixed. Like it'll usually be like they're afraid to say that he's good. So what they do is they'll be like, yeah, he's taking out like the worst of the worst. But then they'll usually preface it with something like, yes, he's a ruthless, violent piece of shit, evil human being, or something of that nature. And I completely disagree. Completely. So, first, no matter where you go, the justice system is extremely flawed. Oftentimes, the very people who are supposed to be dispensing justice are just as guilty as the people they're trying to fucking prosecute or whatever. There's all sorts of holes. But the point is, from a utilitarian perspective, this man killed on a record at least, I think it was 70 something people. He claims to have killed over 100. And I believe it personally, but we'll never know for sure. And assuming that every single one of those people were guilty of heinous shit, fucking rapists, child sexual assaulters, murderers, domestic abusers, all that good shit. You have to look at things through like a chain of interconnected interactions with other people. So if it were just one person that was like a piece of shit, like let's say the guy that he killed whenever he was heading to prison when he made the decision to go into general population. That guy may have just fucking died in prison or whatever, but we don't know. Maybe that was his first fucking crime and he would have got out in like a few years and he would have continued. There's a high likelihood of that. That one person could have fucked up the lives, who knows, like 2 to 10, 15, 20 or more people. That has to be factored into your analysis. You can't discount that. And this is why I disagree with this like magical automatic value to life. Like all life is equally valid. That is bullshit. Your life is valid insofar as you are a decent human being. So, yeah, like this notion that life is inherently sacred and even the worst people on earth should have their life spared, it's just silly to me. Like, I do not understand how people can reach that conclusion. This man should have never felt any sort of sympathy for the people that he killed, assuming that there weren't any mistakes, assuming that the people he killed were actually guilty of the things he thought that they were guilty of. Maybe I would make exceptions for like personal, like if he had any like personal killings that was because of like emotion, as in like someone wronged a family member, but it wasn't like absolutely crystal clear whether it was true or if the family member was manipulating him. I don't know that that's the case, by the way. I'm just saying if that were the case, then maybe I could see like, yeah, this is fucked up. But outside of that, like all of the way people frame this, like this guy is an absolute piece of shit. No, he wasn't. And he more than likely was a psychopath. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. But he didn't need to be. A completely normal human being using just logic could decide to become the instrument of justice for all of these people. And it's frowned on in society. It's considered wrong. It's taboo. But it's not. You can't gauge things based on what's commonly acceptable, because that means nothing. It's just stupid. I realize that some people aren't just taking what they hear from society and what is frowned on or whatever, and they still disagree with it, and that's fine. But I don't think that you can logically defend it. I think that you'll be engaging in some sort of fallacious thinking. And I can explain if any of you come forward, like in detail. But I believe that we need more people like Pedro, and the world would be a much better place for various reasons. So fear is a very, very powerful tool. If there were enough people like Pedro, yes, there would still be crime, but it would diminish greatly. The more people were, quote, made examples out of, the more these type of people would like question their actions. Is it really worth it? Because especially if it's not just one guy, like we saw what happened to Brazil. Brazil's criminal underworld like fucking like talked in hushed whispers and like feared this guy like he was the fucking boogeyman. One guy. If there were several, it could eliminate almost entirely. It would drastically reduce the percentage of heinous crimes like fucking rape and child sexual assault type shit, just because people would think it's not worth the chance. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Feel free to disagree. Thank you for your time.